Hello again. This is number 2 in the writing workshop series, and this time we're going to talk about how to write an action scene. Okay, what is a good action scene? What is it supposed to be doing? And how can we make it sort of riveting, gripping, grim, and at the same time somehow an epiphany of the human condition? Obviously, these are matters of life and death, or they could be. And in that sense, we're thrust into another kind of experience of our general day-to-day lot, right? These are extra mundane conditions, things that don't happen often to us or ever. In that sense, extreme action it differs from the intimate scenes, obviously, because almost everyone is involved in some kind of intimacy over the life course. And we fall in love, we fall out of love, and all of that, even though sometimes very painful, wondrous, even to a certain extent miraculous, because how do two people who are strangers one day, the next day suddenly feel like there's something between them, and then over time maybe that they cannot even live without the other person. That takes us closer into this sort of sense that action in life is perhaps more present than we would generally think of it. Okay. I'm going to share with you 3 different kinds of action scenes. One, a contemporary scene with young people who are experiencing real action for the first time. Okay, so it's similar to one of the scenes that I read with you for the first workshop, where we've got 2 young people who make love with one another for the very first time, their first experience of intimacy. So here's this first scene, the first experience of action, of real action with these young people. Then I'm going to read with you another piece of verse, just to give you a different sense of style and also abstraction, just as we did with intimacy. One option, obviously, is to write an abstract of action and to leave it to the reader's imagination, all the more so. And poesis can do that perhaps better than prose. And finally, an historical scene. Okay, this one from the American Civil War, from 1862, in a place called Shiloh, Tennessee. It's a place I studied quite intimately. I was present there. I hope that will come through. That chapter is from a recent novel of mine called Post Nothing, a historical novel. But first, let's take a look at this contemporary scene. And the first thing I'll say about action in general is it's the same kind of caution applies as we talked about with intimacy. Stay away from the technical and the anatomy of action. I've read a lot of action scenes that are kind of sabotaged by someone dwelling on the specs of their weapon, for example, or the power that it has, or what it can do. And it's like, okay, wait a second. I really don't need to know any of that. I want to know how that character feels about being in combat or being in some other kind of action. I want to know why they're doing what they're doing, how they're thinking, or how they're compelled not to think when one is thrust into sort of the heat of those kinds of moments. Okay, so let's take this, we'll take a read of this, and then we'll take it apart together. This is from volume 2 this time of the Queen of Hearts trilogy. I don't know how well that's coming across because there's light shining on it. This is Her Own Most Lives, volume 2. We're on page 321. "She's just now going in," Ames hissed at me after about 10 minutes of silent vigil from the opposite side of the street. In the deepening twilight, I didn't catch who had actually let her in. Ames shrugged the same back at me when I shot her the question in a glance. It would have helped to know at least some of whom was home before we ourselves went in. As I had vowed, I let Ames lead. After a 10 count, also pre-prepared, we stole across the narrow ribbon of asphalt. No yellow or white line halved it, no boundary between the good citizen and what we were about to become. Well, more like to return to, given our other dubious exploits thus far. Take no prisoners was the order of the new dawn. Anne would have to make the big decision, though. Was Kent with us, or was he with them? One of our two trusty crowbars demolished one of the rear basement windows, and after slowly and almost silently breaking out the frame and the remaining shards of glass, we were in. I was aware that only about 1 in 3 American households actually had at least one firearm in it. It would be handy if this was one of them in one sense, we could steal it, but in the other, perhaps more palpable sense, it would be downright dangerous, since it could easily be used to defend the residence against two armed intruders with the gear to level it with the earth. Ames' job was to survey and steal. Mine was to set up the accelerant in advantageous places and get it ready to be lit at a moment's notice. We had to defend ourselves during this part of the ambuscade. One assumption we discussed was simply an extrapolation. Both houses of the unholy we had breached thus far had magic circles in them, and both looking like they had dated from either the original build or shortly thereafter. With this house, it looked to have been constructed circa 1920 this time, a couple of generations at least newer than the other two, have its own circle as well. Part of Ames's task was to see. Gasoline and old paper, always good. Gasoline and dirty laundry that was dry? Okay. Gasoline and natural gas intake? Yes. 3 times lucky. Don't fuck it up with your nose right on top of the pipes, girl. Phew. Okay, it's starting to stink down here. I rested the fuel container upside down underneath the bottom of the stairwell, so it instantly cut access off to the basement once it got going. If the fire crews arrived, they would have to go aerial to drench it. But that said, it would also cut off our point of ingress. We might have to fight our way out. What I took upstairs from our amateurish arson kit, batteries not included, were a couple of plastic packets I'd filled with a little gasoline. Those I would put underneath the stove burners and flick them on. I was hoping for a conventional stovetop, as natural gas would act so quickly I'd probably lose my hand. And of course the ceramic top, my favorite since they were so easy to clean, and Mom always gave us compliments for doing so at her place, would take far too long. Call me Goldilocks with an edge. What I would have done in her place, come to think of it. I would have barricaded the house with the 2 beds that weren't just right, first of all. Then, when the 3 bears showed up and had trouble getting in, I would have gunned them down one after another as they stood pushing at the door. Then I would have slept all the better, torching the place in the morning, barbecue bear meat. Then a shudder. It would be best if the house fire consumed any bodies we were planning on leaving in it. That might mean dragging corpses hither and thither before lighting it up. Good things Ames was solid. Plus, she was keyed up in the utmost. It was easy to tell. I knew then another part of my role was to be the rational one. If we met with undue resistance, then it might be best to retreat. I could hear voices upon attaining the ground floor. I did the stove job. As expected, the top was just right. That seemed odd, though, given the wealth a major lawyer might have accrued. But then there's no lady of the house, so to speak. Hence the kitchen's been allowed to get outdated. Fine. Your brother apparently has a new girlfriend, a man's voice. Could be the father. But now I know to whom he's speaking all right. Devon. Hard to believe, Pops. What did she look like, by the way? Oh, cute enough. Girl next door, that sort of thing. No one you'd ever be interested in, I expect. Son, given Hannah's talents in that department? Many departments, Dad, many. Yeah, too many. Way too fucking many. If she's actually here, we're probably toast. But from that snippet, I gather she was not. Now someone's leaving. Okay. Devon just said farewell to his father. It might be just the 3 guys, batching it tonight. I'm too far away from the upper floor bedrooms. Ames, now, should I simply slice this fellow's throat open with my trusty Tonto? Is he even involved in anything at all? I know. I watched as the fellow bent over and picked up the little ball of paper I'd flung into the center of the large living space. It was a beautiful interior, a shame to destroy it, but now my eyes were distracted by something else, just peeking out from under the broad and richly hued oriental carpet. There was no doubt of it. Alternating my focus between the man's facial expressions as he opened the ball of paper and squinting at what certainly looked like the edge of a painted circle on the hardwood floor, I ever so gently drew my sword. Okay, Sky, your little diagram needs to come to life here. The man was now on his phone. He had turned his back to my position. 2 things I needed to do before going all in. 1, use the tip of my blade to move the carpet just enough to be sure what I think I'm seeing is really there. 2, overhear as much of the conversation as possible. No, 2 is out. He's texting someone, damn it. But number 1, yes, it is a painted circle. Ames would not have been able to note it, since this guy hadn't moved out of this room since we had understood he was even present. Of course, he knows we're present now, or maybe not. He might think Anne and Kent were teasing him, but the diagram I had gotten Sky to draw on the paper was none other than the most boldly inscribed monogram in the ceiling above Haddon's magic circle. It had been done in red, all the others in black. And indeed, when we had gone through the peignoir in the closet, it was the one monogrammed item that had been missing. The man now put down his phone and contemplated the paper. The fact that he hadn't called to his younger son was instructive, but he was ready for me. How I knew this, I couldn't tell you. It almost felt like the sword itself had gotten sluggishly heavy in my hand. I couldn't attack with it feeling like that, aside from my paltry skills. Okay, hold on. Maybe it will let me know the time, the right time. Now I silently texted Ames. No response. We'd agreed that whatever we sent to one another would simply do without question. Ames had to trust me first by chance. And by gods, here she is, trotting into the room as if she'd been invited in all along. May I ask who you are? The sword's weight had vanished. I attacked. Oh my gods, what? Ames hadn't waited. She had produced her pipe and smashed the fellow's face in with it. As he was falling, I swung again, and the man's head was flung along with the transferred force, rolling across the carpet until it bumped into one of the leather couches. No word, my stalwart friend. This is real. Get action. Ames nodded once to me and took off upstairs. I went through the rest of the house now looking for anyone else. Then, finding no one, I did it again, this time looking for anything else. I tore the carpet back, blood-soaked as it was. The fire would have to consume all of this. I turned up the stove burners, and shortly 2 minor explosions shook the kitchen cabinetry. The magic circle looked old enough. It had 4 cardinal engrams etched within it. The 4 elements. Huh? I whirled to see, well, nothing and no one, and yet I had distinctly heard the voice. It was that of a young woman. Not Acton, thank God. Otherwise, I think I would have shit my leggings at that moment. Someone I had heard before, a voice I had known, but as if in another life, a separate existence. I needed some distance. What were the 4 elements again? Water was surely one of them. Oh, I get it. I get it. Thank you, whoever you are. Taking out the cloth that had come with the sword, I cleaned it. Then another light dawned on me. Which pictogram was water? And if water was one of the elements, surely fire would be another. There was only one way to find out. A clean, clear liquid was now oozing over the hardwood as I had pushed the tip of my sword into the first symbol. Okay, got it. Next, a whoosh of cool air blowing up in my face. Okay, folks, this is what it means to lose your mind. And why wouldn't you? Murdering someone who was only a suspect, for example. The third symbol generated nothing but dirt. Of course, air and earth. Fine, have at it. There. Holy shit, Lissa! My sword was now aflame with the lurid neon duo, a deep turquoise and vivid viridian, one the color of my love's sky, the other the color of my sister's eyes. Now I knew I had the upper hand. The thing to do was to figure out how to conjure this effect when I actually confronted Acton. Ames had broken in upon my makeshift ritual, but her face was a shadow of dismay. What is it? There's no one else here, as far as I can tell. Time to finish the job and go after Devon. That's not it. Kent and Anne are both gone. The upstairs window was open in his bedroom. And probably just wanted to get him out of the line of fire. Personally, I'm disappointed that there weren't more people here, especially now. Uh-oh, be careful what you wish for. A car had just driven up, one with modified exhaust. I hate those things, signs of juvenile male doubts about their own masculinity. Kent wasn't like that. Even I was willing to give it up for him on that score. Ames ducked low as the front door burst open. Ames, his bedroom. Amy seemed to understand what I was driving at, though it was a long shot. I had held up my hand in the usual configuration of a revolver. My friend vanished, and I took up a position in the space that wasn't already lit, some kind of den. No access to the basement from here, though. I remembered Gwyn's edict regarding open field action. This was hardly an open space. Antique furniture everywhere, amongst other objects such as lamps, collectibles of various eras. All this was going to go up. It was a complete and utter waste, and this only added to my frustration. Then the first of them. My God, she's about our age. What the fuck? Must be one of the 31 then, huh? Trained by Acton? Hope not. She's carrying something that looks like an axe. Fine, Miss Priss, suck on this. The strike was silent, and even her head had landed on a purple velvet settee, not altering its color scheme too outside the theme of the room. I grabbed the axe from the limp hand and flung it into the face of the next girl. This isn't good. We need the adults to be confronting us, not their victims. This is like the Red Army in Berlin, Ukrainians used for shock troops. History class, you gotta love it. I finished girl number 2 with a quick thrust into her chest. Then I heard it. Ames must have found what she was looking for and used it. 3 down, unless one of the assailants was armed as well. That was unthinkable. Where are you, number 4? Oh, fuck. Oh, holy fucking... Hello again, little girl. Oh, well done. Acton seemed unarmed, but in that next moment she had raised her arm. With her left hand, it caught the throwing star Ames had flung at her from the landing. She then crushed it in her gloved hand. Metal-lined gloves must be. My sword had gone out, so to speak, which might well be another sign of impending doom. Acton surveyed the growing damage, and then Ames was yelling at me, "Get down, Lissa!" I flung myself to the floor, but Acton had interpreted the ever-changing scene correctly. She grabbed up a chair, and the bullet buried itself in the wooden frame, coming out much slowed and at a crazy angle, bouncing off the stone fireplace, and then who knows where. In that instant, Acton had vanished back out the front door. Ames was all set to go after her, but I got up and in her face. What the fuck, Lissa? This is our moment. No, it isn't. Look at my sword, Ames. Well, so what? It's still a sword, blade intact, etc. For sure. It was still usable, but that wasn't what I was trying to get at. Ames flashed her newfound weapon. Beretta, Glock, I didn't know enough about guns to recognize it. Check your revolver, Ames. Open it up. So my intuition was correct. Holy shit, fuck me. The chamber was empty. There had been all of 2 cartridges in the weapon, and Ames had already used them both. She gave me a look of true concern, almost a kind of terror. I'll go through the place. There isn't time. I'm going to just set off the basement, and then we need to gather those bodies over that symbol on the floor there. The place where the fire element emblem had been was rapidly turning into a black hole. Was there a dark version of the plasma fire then? How would it interact with the usual arson-inspired flammables? I bet the fire crews won't be able to put it out. Let's hope it doesn't spread then, otherwise we'll be back in that same situation my sister confronted with the nature park. We need to ID these 3 girls to make sure their names are not in the monuments we gave to Skye. Pause, then Amy corrected herself before I could do so. No, in fact, we don't. That art installation would already be having an effect. Good call, my friend. Okay, the basement is well aflame now. No text from Anne. Ames and I had to leap out the back porch, upper story exit. The backyard was sloped, so it was maybe a matter of 5 feet at most. I rolled somewhat instinctively, keeping my sword flush to my torso. Ames had been in ballet back in Texas with my sister, so apparently she had no problem righting herself. I got up and was immediately being held by an unknown person. My gods, are you girls okay? Is there anyone else in there? A neighbor, evidently. Oops. Sorry about that. It's better that there are no witnesses, Ames declaimed as she finished the job with a kitchen knife to the throat. I had to swallow hard there. I had not, repeat not, expected such militancy from the eldest of our circle. There were voices now yelling, and also in the distance, like a harbinger of the nightmare yet to come, sirens, the kind that did not beckon, but rather guarded shores just as treacherous as the one Odysseus was tempted by. And speaking of old songs, when we got back out to the ride, it was, well, you guessed it. And in Kent, then. I sure as fuck hope so. Look, this thing is clearly a mark against us. If we keep using it, maybe not. Oh, would Kent's father have registered his firearm? How likely was that? How recently had he purchased it, for instance? Would there be any transaction records? We knew nothing of the state's gun laws to any regard, so Ames, go ahead. She ditched it down a sewer which surely outflowed to the Columbia. Fine, then. We could walk, but it would be about half an hour or so. Ames was now on her phone. I gestured to her, and we picked a series of side streets that by this time in the evening had more or less completely cleared out. We looked like 2 kids from school, hauling backpack and duffel, returning home from whatever extracurricular activity our parents had enrolled or enlisted, that was. No one? Ames shook her head. Her face was wet. It was clear that her abject worry over Anne's whereabouts had driven her to kill outside of our foes' lines. Well, we'd done it once before, but that had been Anne herself under real duress, protecting her new love. Now the heel was on the other foot, and Ames, when she had realized that she couldn't protect Anne, had nevertheless acted with fatal consequences. The one good thing about it would be if Acton and company read the morning news, they'd know we were prepared to be just as ruthless as they presumably were. Reckless, too, though. How to keep those two sensibilities separate. No one had noticed us. No one followed us. I was still on edge, it was, enough to not ask any questions myself. I felt like I owed it to Ames, who had been clutched back at the now surely raised house. Should we do the same to the other sites within our knowledge, or would that give the police too much information? I had configured my bag so that with one simple motion I could draw the Tanto out of both its half-closed box and loosened sheath. I could almost see Skye's little emblem on the base of its pommel. What had we learned from this minor apocalypse? Well, the father was clearly a score. I hoped a major one. He had summoned the 4 Dark Girl Knights. Fortunately, 3 of them had proven ineffective, which did give my confidence a boost. So that's one point. On the downside, Acton, after she had arrived in force, hadn't batted an eye at our damage. She not only had the nerves of obsidian, she had demonstrated a couple of novel skills, catching the throwing star and dispatching it, and then, perhaps with some dumb luck, catching the contemporary version of same and deflecting it. She evidently couldn't guess about the number of cartridges, and so she had then taken the safer option, but who wouldn't have? The only reason we ourselves had checked was because of my intuition about my sword's flame going out right at the moment. If Ames had pursued Acton, then she'd be dead by now, and I would be facing her killer alone. Home and still no Anne, no car, no mom, or for that matter, Steve. But we had struck back and struck hard. One of their executives was now dead. I was almost sure of it. The ring of girls was now 28 in number, and we had a symbolic fix on 6 of those remaining. One magical site had been leveled, but Acton now knew about the throwing stars, hence her well done remark as she had caught out Ames's first attempt. The most chilling thing was Acton's lack of reaction to the deaths of her 3 team members. It was as I had thought then. The girls were completely disposable, as sexual performers in life and as competents in death. In fact, their lives, since they had joined to this novel madness, had ceased to have any meaning at all. Okay, so what's going on in a scene such as that? First of all, we have a kind of a lead up, all right? They're crossing a boundary. They're very aware of it. They're moving from good citizenship, whatever that might be, to something other than that. And we want to sort of put that in its place to give some sense of tension, not only in the scene itself, but in the minds of the actors in that scene, okay? There's a sense that young people who are obviously not criminals, but who are about to act in a ruthless and even a murderous fashion, are somehow aware that, okay, this is not normal, right? This is not normal life, and I'm being compelled to do this because this is a war, and we're in it up to the eyeballs, and we have to fight as best we can. Here they are learning how to do it. It's a little awkward, obviously. They don't really know what they're doing at all. They have primitive weapons, so-called, and then they find a handgun in the house and use it as best they can. And the results are thus. And then, so you have a rising action. You have a sense of tension. They're kind of figuring things out. You're walking with them. You're through the basement window. You're looking for flammables. You're setting up your arson kit. And then whoever's in the way, you're going to have to confront them and get rid of them. So this is what they do. They have other things going on at the same time, and then the arch-villain just happens to show up and confront them, and of course she is unfazed by all of the efforts of these young people, the young heroines who are on site at the time. Okay. So that tension, in other words, where you're going into combat in this case, and you're hoping for some sense of conquest, victory, triumph, all of that is unresolved, which is a nice way to introduce a serious piece of action into your story. Don't let that first piece of action resolve the whole conflict, okay? Unless you're writing a short story, obviously. But if you're writing a longer piece, let that be part of the rising action, obviously. It's an action scene, yes, but it's also a rising action scene. And then for a denouement, we have this sense that we're returning to what seems like normal life, but of course we've done these things now, right? We can no longer ourselves be normal, even if we can give the appearance of being so. So here they are, they ditch the gun, they're walking back, and Melissa, who's our narrator here in Volume 2, is reflecting on, oh, okay, yeah, we could be just 2 kids coming back from a after-school activity. That's what we look like. But what an extracurricular activity it actually was, okay? A different way, and obviously a much more brief way of writing an action scene, can occur in poiesis. This is now back to Volume 3, same trilogy. The title is appropriately Got Action, and this is very much an action novel. There's hardly room to breathe in it. And getting closer to the first climax, we have Skye, the artist, who is Melissa's partner, charged with trying to paint a portrait of Guinevere that will attract Guinevere's spirit to sort of invest. It's kind of a good version of the old occult method called consecrated hosting, where, of course, you're murdering someone. After painting their portrait, you smear the blood on that portrait, you smear your own blood on the portrait, and then you're able to do some sort of hocus pocus with that. I'm sure some of you who are interested in the occult, and I'm not talking about alchemy and the occult sciences, but I'm talking about the romantic sort of 19th century occult, will know of consecrated hosting. This is the opposite of that. It's got the same mechanism, but then the purpose is not a dark one. Okay. So here is Skye realizing what she needs to do. I gasped as Perry strode back out. There must be yet more technology in this place, no doubt spawned by the Queen's physics genius that would allow Perry the Red Knight, he of the immortal blood, to reseat himself, to use his word, but more profoundly his message to me. I knew exactly what I had to do now. Rushing up, forgetting that I was still naked from bathing, running back into the studio, which was actually several minutes at pace away from the bedrooms, I snatched up the ample canvas that so obviously betrayed its first coats, its original gambits. One brush for the drying blood, another for the oil, and another, and another. Gwyn's face took shape. I let its spirit guide my wrist. Both hands now. I had become adept at ambidextral painting, something even Liss didn't know I had accomplished. Robinson had shown me several painters who had experimented with it. I had taken it up with verve. In about an hour the thing was done. I did not expect it itself to speak to me, but I held it above my head, getting up on my toes as if I had ever been in dance, pushing up, and then I shouted, "I shall ever sing of you, love. This is no person, no!" And as I held it high, its wet, oily face staring at what I hoped was Gwyn's ethereal spirit, observing me and applauding even, then, still inspired, I sang with Myrrha what I also hoped would be to Gwyn's liking, a paean to her love for us, her gifts to us, her very being. This to you, who lives beyond my reach and ken, yet I love thee as I would the one who strains for me alone. I cannot press such love as my heart now and then breaks itself upon the shore that also crushes bone. No wonder you exalt the air above, the night that is beyond men and women both, and all those in between that set in stone. No longer will love be known as ever that extent between the fair and fairer seen, and I am but the herald of this wider, longer mat, laying underneath all two-souled colour being. These souls have given up their claim, their pat clamour against which I have plugged my ears atween. Enter thus, I both command and commend to thee, so that we may port your soul, and soul asunder, split as is the heavens by the lighted scree, split as were my eyes and ears and lips by thunder. Such storms as these will ever question me, so I shall never accept the loot of blunder. Enter thus, I beg you, in loving supplication, with my tears, my sweat, my mucus, juice, and blood alike, even my awful, but not awful's urination, meant no disrespect, but only that which I would strike down all who overlook our human situation, and to this I call you to return to us your endless Reich. Okay, so Skye, inspired by the Arabic poetess Myrrha, with whom she has had some spiritual and ethereal consorting earlier in the trilogy, is able to sort of sing this song to Guinevere's spirit, enacting that spirit to enter into that portrait, so that this sort of occult method, although the opposite of consecrated hosting in terms of the dark side, this would serve this lighter purpose, this good purpose, and yet Skye also is becoming aware, of course, through the pre-Christian ethics of her antagonists and now her patron, the Dark Queen, that dark and light are not separate things at all, and good and evil do not exist in opposition to one another. So she's sort of struggling with trying to understand these ethics, and she's putting this into an active sense where she's taking action. It's a very different kind of action than combat, obviously, so I just want to throw that out on the table for you to sort of give you a sense that action does not just mean, okay, let's once more into the breach, right? It's something else that upshifts the rising action in a lengthy narrative, or sometimes even in a shorter piece of fiction, where you can feel that tension as a reader rise. You can feel the temperature rise. There's action that could be in dialogue. There's action that can be in somebody's head. And then there's action that can be sort of expressed in these various ways. Okay, you'll notice that in the first scene, where Amy and Melissa are actually into some kind of domestic or urban combat scene, we're still back and forth inside the narrator, Melissa's head, and now in this other scene, which occurs much later in our little epic, there's a sense that Skye is giving voice not even to her thoughts, but to her very soul in trying to speak to the soul of another. Okay, so that's the puzzle in a sense, is how do you speak to someone's very soul? You have to sort of disregard the ears and perhaps the other senses as well. You're speaking to something that is in its own sense and thus has its own sensibility. Okay? If you can do that through an action scene, just in the same way that we talked about, if you could do that in a scene of intimacy or a love scene, then you're really getting at the kernel of why you would want to place an action scene in your narrative at all. Okay. Finally, third and last example. Thank you again for your patience here. This is Chapter 5, Shiloh, from my recent novel, Post Nothing, which is a novel that sees a young woman whose beau, whose fiancé, has joined up to the Union Army in order to pay a debt against the wishes of our heroine, our narrator, Juliet, excuse me, and then she says, well, fuck that, I'm joining up too. And we know historically that about 800 women served in combat roles on both sides, on the Union and Confederate, and they dressed as men and fought with men and fought as if they were men. And the records we have of their fighting shows that they had very few disadvantages in doing so. And as you might imagine back then, there wasn't the kind of sort of vetting that said, okay, wait a second, you're not a guy. You can't do this. That was not in place, for better or worse. And so we have these people. And so why not write a novel about one of these young women and her experiences, and she and another woman that she happens to meet in their unit are now serving under Grant at Shiloh, Tennessee, as part of Colonel Burge's Sharpshooters, which was a unit that was put together in St. Louis early on in the war. Okay. If you're going to write a historical action scene, again, stay away from the technical, stay away from the anatomical, but at the same time, we don't have the same kind of freedom that we had in writing just a pure fantasy scene as the first one was, and to a certain extent the second one. Here, we are at a real place where real events happened, and we want to be as authentic to the landscape as possible, even though the characters we place in that landscape are fictional. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind as we just move through this, and then we'll take it apart again briefly afterwards. Okay, Shiloh. We had explained to Colonel Burge that we were from Minnesota just to cover for our accents. He was delighted to have us, however, after observing our target tests. Being attached to Grant's army was a new experience for both Flip and I. There were so many thousands of men all around us, and of all sorts and skills, ages and birthplaces, that we were treated as was everyone else. No one questioned our abilities, and indeed serving under Burge gave us a novel status. Flip, for her part, reveled in it. The 5 months between St. Louis and southern Tennessee had passed surpassingly quick, and there had been scant enough action to be seen the entire period. Even now, General Grant had not seen fit to post pickets, so Flip and I and our sharp-shooting comrades had scattered ourselves through and round the wide encampment, some bathing and some splashing in the broad-bended river to the northeast, and some few of us seeking a little dip in a stream which ran trickling alongside a narrow roadway, which in its turn occupied a depression in the tumulus of greenery. A flattened-out meadow rose off its southern flanks, and a copse of trees, poplars, birches, and slender beeches sprouted to its north. General Prentice's troops had, for the main part, been encamped out past the meadow, and some few of us had been assigned to provide the same kind of cover that Flip and I had performed way back at Bull Run. I shivered at the thought of it, for there it had been mere hundreds fighting, but if we were to engage with this seething mass against our mirrored forces, what then? Yet no one spoke of such things, and in that moment the war seemed very far away. No one imagined great battles, pitched or unpitched. No one mused upon strategy, only tactics, and certainly amongst the low-ranking volunteers and few officers, what needed to be done to actually win out was not on our minds. This is pleasant land, Jules, and pleasant air. 'Tweren't a hint of summer back home in April now. Ain't you hankering about that? Oh, Jules, Julie, darling. I had begun to tear up at Flip's mention of Connecticut. Not that I'd seen a whole whack thereof before I'd signed on, of course, but just the principle of the whole thing. The best part of being back in official service, rather than roaming the wide but also shrouded earth, was that I could write and receive regular mail. My father had been beside himself for those few weeks it had taken Flip and I to run ourselves across the old western states into those more recent. I had sent a few notes to him, but his, of course, could never catch us up. But now I had, over the interim, been once again brought within the hallowed ken of knowing that at the least Nathan was still alive. His regiment, whose identity he still forswore revealing, had been posted hither and thither, reflecting the vicissitudes, and I dare say the downright lassitudes, of what was slowly becoming known as the Eastern Theatre. Now here were we, far to the southwest of such doings and undoings, and for the moment doing ourselves little enough. "We have no holier stance than our former colleagues, given their lack of besetting fight," I ventured. Flip smiled this off, but another of our marksmen nodded with a growl. "Nay, but did we sign on to sit on our tails, troop onward, and sit again?" Now others joined in, and the boyish banter, which began as an effort of nervous solidarity in the face of death, and ascended to the bravura of mimicking death's persona, started in. Flip had always encouraged this kind of talk, partly, I knew, as a manner by which she and I could continue to conceal our truer natures. But not only that. I had come to know her well enough, and could even say I loved her. We had indeed made love a fair few times on that otherwise solitary track, and for a while I had thought it was mere pleasure designed to ward off a perilous and creeping doubt. Yet it had become more than that, inevitably perhaps. I did so miss Nate, and even so, Flip was no surrogate lover. Flip was precious to me now, and I to her. What might it be like if tens of thousands of men like us were to meet in battle? I cautiously uttered this. I had past mastered lowering my tones and speaking half in a whisper. This was usually taken as the voice of a young man who was doing his best to be menacing, his utmost to reassure his comrades that he could kill with the best of them, and indeed also with the worst. "One word to that, friend. Glory." Another replied, looking straight into my eyes and then up to the sky. The message was clear enough, and several others intoned eyes in support. "Aye, glory be and glory done," another put in, laying out upon his back. Flip now looked slightly consternated. What price such glory, I wondered to myself. What we'd seen and what we'd done at Bull Run seemed little enough, and yet report after report told of similar engagements all across the eastern seaboard, whether it be naval or upon the land, or perhaps both. Yet there had also been a growing sense that something or other had to burst. But not here, not now. The songbirds chirbled and the small brook burbled as I lay back, pulling my cap over my face, for the sun was bright enough, burbled my own way into a slumber. It was early morning before the dawn that Flip and I had been awakened in our lean-to tent. There was some kind of commotion, and our watchman had told us that it seemed to him to have been going on for at least an hour. "A skirmish, by the gods!" Flip's face was one of excitement only. I gave her a look, but by this time even I had grown quite weary of inaction. I felt my blood begin to rise and my heartbeat accelerate, but those round us had quite clearly shrugged it off, and I tried to relax my frame once again. It was a tad too early to rise after all. Then all of us shot up, of a piece. The clamor was suddenly significantly closer. I made ready with my weapon, checking its bore and muzzle for dirt, as we had been taught to do. We learned the night before that we had been put out to provide potential covering fire for Hurlbut, but he later had to pivot, as Prentice's forces were by midday in hasty retreat in front of us. We ourselves had not yet received action, and Flip was getting as frustrated as I was getting anxious. "You know, I heard some of our generals did not even believe we were under attack, let alone facing a full-scale assault," I hissed over to her. "Aye, and now Grant himself has just told Prentice to hold at all hazards." Good Lord, that meant us now. That meant that we were the pinion that would either save the hour or succumb thereto. The larger coverage of trees, both hickory and oak, provided a sense of safety, but the abandoned road, some ancient cart track from who knows when, was a bare few feet in its descent and alone could not be relied upon to dissuade infantry. I flattened myself and began to sight. This was always the moment wherein I ceased not only to be a woman, but as well to be a person. I was now a member of a group, a reasoning insect, who yet could be relied upon to fight from another instinct singular. Some called the soldiers of the Confederacy graybacks, but as that was also the casual term for lice, I had never used such an epithet. Our rivals were just that, tired of we Northerners making their decisions for them. We Yankees, as they called us, which, to me at least, did not seem particularly offensive. There they are, now what? Flip was laying straight out beside me. Another moment as our own flanks touched, and I had a flash of our intimacy. Beautiful it had been, and yet this too had a strange beauty to itself. Being thrown together and now in each other's hands, how different was that from marriage itself? In the very palms of one another, our lives in the balance between slender fingers and rough-hewn thumbs, our living and breathing forms telescoped and wrapped up, rolled into slender nuance and rammed down the muzzle of a rifle, or compressed and polished and slotted into its breech. I put my life in your hands, my new love. As I place this cartridge in my own, my weapon is my trusty truth, but your presence, my fearless faith. Ah, would you now? Flip gritted her teeth and pulled off. I hadn't even seen them come across. Their fire was ragged and their charge repelled. Good Lord, and again. Time had no meaning during those early afternoon hours of April the 6th. I had lost count of the number of their charges, and in behind us, our poultry forces had been blessed with the most modern of small artillery, so our shrapnel and grape, as the British had begun calling it far back in the great naval engagements of Napoleon's time and even before, shredded the rebel forces, reducing their infamous yell to a vestigial whimper time and again. I had no idea how many rounds I had loosed, nor if a single one of them had had the desired effect. Many ballistics were designed merely to knock one's opponent down. I had learned in training that some flew the air at a snail's pace of only 300 feet per second. This sounded god awfully fast, but I had also learned what it had been like to be struck by one of these rounds. Yes, those beside had been knocked to the ground, perhaps cracking a rib or two, and then gutted or impaled by their opponent's bayonet as they lay there stunned and unseeing. And there was by now blood in buckets raining upon us as if in the spring showers, spurted up across our line of sight by the terminus of artillery fire and the interminable shooting of rifles back and forth, up and down. Flip and I felt soaked by it, as if we too were now becoming part of the very earth, red in its maw, opening up its gullet and preparing to swallow us under. Over the course of less than 3 hours, our own forces had been reduced, and yet we held. The larger trees knocked about but unfallen, leaves shed and reddened, boots shed and bloodied, tunics torn and crimson, the brook flowing and bleeding, and I rolling through it and over it, and then daring to crouch up, feeling a strong hand on my shoulder once again pushing me to the ground. I am out of shot, I told the officer. In the deepest dungeon of din he understood, and indeed to me it had seemed my voice was quite normal and well modulated, as if I had been before our governess. What was her damned name now? And uttering a simple report of my academic progress. Flip had never covered her ears. She seemed to soak in the sound, make hay with the noise and nastiness of never-nettled nothingness. She soaked it right in, just as our remaining uniform was now purple in hue. It was a deep color, one that might well have served for an evening dress. I tried to imagine myself in such finery, a flocculent lace highlighting a porphyry of sheer presence, myself the featured flattered performer, beauty as I had once been. It was a color that felt deep, that royal shade, and now I knew the shadow of its mark. The only way royalty had itself survived mortality was to have created its own morality. But here was history having its final say, and I a part thereof. It must be indeed a massive battle, and the unknown officer who had stayed beside me and thence had offered me one of his revolvers in lieu of my now almost useless rifle, declared right into my ear that he had heard tell of no less than 7,000 casualties from Prentice's forces alone. He must have in fact screamed it, for I had flinched, though my ears were past being numbed by anything by this point. I reached for Flip, and she gave me a flash of that patent grin made up of mischief and mischance the both. Had she been better born, she would have made a fine schoolgirl after all. Then a wink. She too was without ammunition, and so I offered my own loaned weapon to her. She shook her head, gesturing down. Loan, no, gifted, and now them both, for the fellow whose second gun was now in Flip's most capable hands was laying in 2 pieces behind us. I closed my eyes for a moment, and then felt Flip dive atop me. Down, girl, and stay down. They're lining up their carronades. Good gods, of course. Why had it taken them so long? This fellow who had squared off against us, Ruggles was his odd name. Someone had told me earlier that afternoon, had continued to offer infantry charges, and though they had bruised us badly, yet now they could no longer run across the meadow, for it had become so piled with corpses that its dirt had turned to a seething sea of sequined sherry, a brownish-red ichor, punctuated by bits of white bone and hoary, hellish flesh. Should I e'er forget such a scene as that, O devil, only then might I wonder at the real thing. About high time, the fools, Flip muttered, cocking her revolver, only to find that its chambers too were empty. I had not bothered to check on its mate, shaking my head in some disbelief that the both of us yet lived. I squinted across and beheld a lengthy parade of bronze carronades, their menacing muzzles pointed straight at my face. High time this ended. Flip, you are correct. High time to end this. Fight until you can fight no more, and we had damn well done so. I was proud of myself, perhaps perversely. I must have killed, but I knew not whom, or how many, or yet who these dead had now left behind. Their wives, or their girls, their children, their parents and grandparents, and now I had the sudden urge to kill them all, to leave not one behind, for that was surely a heavier burden, a fate more ignominious than to simply die in battle. No, that was easy, and I welcomed it now. This should do it for the Rebs, yep. Flip was murmuring to herself, but I placed my hand upon her neck and caressed it. She moved in beside me and wrapped one arm around my shoulders. This was the best way it should end for us together. Nate, forgive me. Perhaps we shall be wed in another life, you and I. And if you have not yet preceded me, I shall wait for you. I shall wait through the eons in a timeless place. I should welcome that wait, for your life should be long, and you should love another girl than I, or perhaps many, since you are oh so handsome, and such a stallion in your love, such a well-hewn oak of a man by the gods. I love you. Flip opened her mouth, but no sound came forth. I realized I needed to say that one last thing, not truly believing it would be the last. No, not at all. She began to smile, and then she was gone. In a sudden blur of red, the charged atmosphere of life and death hanging in the air where just now she had been. I shrieked and buried my head in my hands, falling prostrate, and this is what saved me, for another carronade ball whizzed right over my fallen form and snapped a number of trees in behind, where I now lay, sobbing and wrecked. I dared not look round me, and now I was being dragged back up, my head lolling to and fro before I shook and steadied myself. The man had me by the throat, but then looked down and gasped aloud. Good God, is Yankee so desperate? The Confederate officer immediately took his hand from me and helped me stand there in front of him. He then grasped me to him and led me off to one side of the assault, waving his men onward and also making some other more obscure hand signals, the meaning of which I was never to know. For some long minutes we moved toward the southeastern flank of that fatal place. I beheld another vision of the inferno, a pond, its waters thick and red, with both men and horses nevertheless drinking it up. I retched at this nightmarish scene, but the officer guided me by it, his face unmoved. At length we settled in behind a bank of bushes, whereupon a comrade of his began to adjudicate. What is this? Hell's Hollow Heckets now? Ah, Shoop, shut it. 50 field pieces, and it's come to this. 10,000 men, and we receive 1,000 prisoners in return? Don't let it be said that a gaggle of geese stopped us a dozen times. Good Lord, had that been the number of failed charges? I sought to speak, as clearly neither of these men, both high-ranking officers it appeared, had manifested any antipathy in my direction. I'm sorry for my part in it. I didn't sign on to kill my southern cousins. Gurley, one don't apologize for courage, the one who had been called Shoop replied, giving me a bemused look. Why did you volunteer, may I ask of you? The second fellow queried. My beloved did afore myself. Now love is such that it does not permit death to intrude upon it, taking the one but not the other. Well, I'll be damned. I'll be double down damned, Shoop exclaimed. That being so, we all need to pack your ladyship out of here. We certainly can't hold you. No one will miss you, as half your friends hightailed it over the course of the day in any case. I had heard throughout our stand that we were as much victims of our very own lesser comrades as we were of the Southerners. Yes, I would imagine so. Come off the farm, did you? Come away from a school? Come out from your father's shoeshine shop? Come down from your herding ranges, your back street stoops, your mother's laps, and all of you into this, then? I tried to mimic Flip's roguish brogue, and her cutting whiplash whip, and then the memory of her did me in. I was weeping in Shoop's burly arms, and he was petting my disheveled hair and the nape of my neck. None of that, missy. You'll ascend to the very nadir of glory. His voice seemed gentle to me, but in reality it must have been but a hoarse rasp, after yelling out orders all the past day and beyond. He now gestured to his counterpart, and the other nodded. Streams of prisoners were by now filing past us, some with dignity, others with terror. No doubt such abjection was sourced in what all of us had seen and done, and not at all in it coming to an end, at least for the time being, and at least for us in that moment. Shoop led me yet further back into Confederate Hill battlefield, and then way off to its right side facing north. Y'all can swim like a fish, I reckon, with your lithe and handsome figure. Thank you. No need, missy. Just keep your head down and don't swim back up the Tennessee, but rather across to the far back. Straight across now, you hear? And if anyone ever claims you need whip for pretending to be a man, just tell them you had no need of such pretense and were more of a man than 10,000 others on this day. Far more. You are a noble gent. I wish you the best. His eyes widened a little, and then he bowed slightly, hand over heart. In my rags, a curtsy was inadmissible, so I placed my palm over my bare chest and turned and dove. The waters here were almost without blemish, yet I had to fight down the urge to vomit even so, as I encountered more than one contorted carcass as I made the crossing. Dusk was not far off as I pulled myself up and out upon the far bank, round a bend, so that I was out of sight, my restive nakedness famished with the hunger for life itself. I had to close my eyes to it all for several moments. The air was cooling, the noise distant, the cannons muted. I must be some miles to the south of where the gargantuan battle yet was being fought. I was apart, alone, and without succor of any kind, but I knew Flip would be by my side now, always, and even if I somehow returned myself to Nate's arms, she would, and without rancor, embrace us both. Okay. So there we have a sense that what happened historically happened very suddenly, and that's exactly how Shiloh did develop. The North was not expecting to be attacked at all, in the least, at that point. They didn't even post pickets, as Juliet mentions in the narrative, and thus they were taken rather by surprise, especially General Prentice. Of course, the forces there at the abandoned road, the sunken road, as it's now called, were the kind of pivot point. All right, they held out long enough, and the Confederacy continued to attack this place that was labeled the Hornet's Nest long enough for Grant to kind of regroup, set up his large artillery at the northern far end of the battlefield, and hold the South off long enough to be replenished by gunboats on the river and also fresh troops. So there was a sense that the Confederacy really had the battle won if they had kind of circumnavigated this little nest of resistance in which I've stuck our characters. It's kind of the focal point of the battle. And that's another thing that I would recommend then is since if you're going to write an action scene from a piece of history that we know in some detail about the history, always stick your characters in the thick of it, if you will, right? In the very center of things. So, and don't do so with any kind of sense of predestination. It's a happenstance thing. Obviously, they could have been stationed elsewhere or not at all. Allow that contrast between the happenstance of normal life and the mishap, right? The misadventure of action to really animate your scene, right? That's where the tension comes from. And then that tension is expressed in the astonishment, the awe, if you will, that the narrator or the characters in your fiction feel now that they have been, quite by happenstance, placed in the center of things. Okay, the whole universe is opened up in an abyss, right? It's very similar to a love scene where the universe opens up in this beautiful way, in this wondrous way, and we feel awe at it, but we feel the same things for this antagonistic, abyssal opening up that a good action scene does. Okay, so here we see Juliet drawn into it. They fight through the afternoon as Prentice's forces did, Hurlbut's forces, and the sunken road. The Confederacy, for some reason, kept launching waves and waves of infantry attack. These were repelled. We don't actually have an exact number. I'm using some poetic license there, prosaic license there, and saying that Shoup, who was serving under Ruggles, said, okay, we did it 12 times. The number is somewhere between 10 and 14 is the estimate in terms of Civil War historians, so it's fine to split the difference. If you've got things like that, it seems petty, it seems very picayune, but if you're going to maintain the authenticity of landscape, even though you're setting fictional characters down within it, give them interaction with characters who actually were there. Don't presume that you know these real people. Okay, we have no record of what Ruggles said during the Hornet's Nest or what Shoup said or what they may have been telling people. All of that is in the moment, okay? And then finally, of course, as the history of the battle showed, they set up 50 bronze carronades and just kept leveling them at the resistance in the Hornet's Nest, and finally that broke. Okay, and so at the moment of that breaking, then Juliet finds herself a prisoner, but very momentarily, right? Because they realize that she is a young woman, and it's like, okay, well, we're not going to hold a young woman here. Just get out of here. You've proved yourself. The Confederate officers are very impressed, obviously, and so they let her go, and the adventure carries on. Okay, so the key things about action, just to sum up, I know this is a very long video, but it's a workshop video, and so if you had paid for an hour's worth of having a writer talk about this or that, then this is sort of what you'd be getting and be sharing text. So I want to give that quality as well as that quantity to you. Stay away from the technical. If you're writing a historical scene, the technical can enter into it only as a matter of record, right? As a matter of public record, and only insofar as if you were there, this is what you might have heard and might have known about, right? in combat, especially in mass combat, communication rapidly breaks down, right? We don't know what's going on in other parts of the battlefield. We only know what's immediately around us, okay, in our survival mode and in our sense that we're going to have to kill someone else or we ourselves will be killed. And then it gets to a point where none of that matters anymore, okay? And so we take Juliet and her friend Philippa, Flip, she calls her, and we take them to that point. They're ready to die. It's time to get this over with. And of course, in the climax of the scene, Flip does die. And she is shredded by a carronade ball, and then Juliet is forced to sort of witness this horrific thing, and then reflect upon it, and then immediately she is taken prisoner. But that, of course, is what saves her, or we're led to believe that that's what saves her. Okay, so thanks for listening. I hope that you got something out of it. I hope your own writing will be improved and enlightened. Once again, 3 different examples, 3 different forms of action. And thanks again for listening. We'll see you again when we do workshop part 3.